Welcome back to Undulations. That was basically me trying to break the digital synthesis algorithm on the Volca drum. So I was throwing a lot at it. I was swinging the tempo from 10 BPM to 600 BPM. The sequence that I had going, I had it all sliced up into 16 subdivisions for each trigger, each step. And then I was running it all through the waveguide resonator and running that. It's basically can go from down kind of like at the lay at the lowest up to more of a tone at the highest, and I was taking it everywhere in between. And then I also did some other motion sequencing on the actual sound synthesis, and it seemed to handle it quite well, I thought. So I feel like the computational stuff that's inside the Volca drum is quite strong. A lot of times with a digital synth, you'll see it sort of freak out or glitch or give up, basically, if you try to do something like that. So I just want to show that up front because it's kind of impressive. And that said, I wasn't really planning on getting a Volca drum. What happened was that when I was doing a little research, looking at the Volca drum manual, while I was doing the Volca NuBass video, I just wanted to make sure that I had my facts straight about which Volca could do what. But as I started to read more about the drum, I just basically decided that it was a good value. It's got a lot of different synthesis parameters that you can control. It's got this sort of physical modeling approach, particularly in terms of this waveguide resonator. And so I think it's a cool device, but I want to give a little bit of context up front and talk about some of the basically Volca drum type things that have come before, as well as just sort of the overall style of this device. Yeah, I think a little context is good to help us understand kind of where the Volca drum fits in, and it'll also help understand how it actually works. I have a bunch of things out here that perhaps you might own, and so by referencing it to these things, maybe that'll help give a little understanding. Now, some of these things are not like the others, and that is the samplers over here. This is a old Yamaha RX-5 that I got at a thrift shop. That's entirely sample based. Here's a cartridge. It's got 28 drum samples on this cartridge. And, you know, that's the way that it was, but now something more modern like the model samples, you can get drum sounds like crazy on it, but pretty much starting with something that you've already made and importing it onto there. And that goes for the Volca sample as well, which kind of, I think in some aspects, supplanted the Volca beats as a Volca of choice for making drums. But if you do that, then you use up some of your Volca sample slots in whatever you're playing. So it's kind of a trade-off. But this thing can hold, I think, 128 samples. It's got 10 parts, and that's relevant to what we're talking about today. So sort of a 10 sample polyphony, if you will. And I like the sample a lot, but that leads us to the Volca Beats, which is again a 10-part device. The Beats is a hybrid analog and sampling device. They call it PCM rather than sampling pulse code modulated. It's pretty much the same thing. I like the Beats, but it's got some notorious weaknesses. Nobody seems to care for the snare, and it doesn't have swing. So I've seen somebody do kind of a little makeup for not having swing by using the stutter time appropriately set. And this stutter, by the way, which has a timing and a depth on the beats, that's kind of like a precursor to this waveguide resonator effect that's on the Volca drum. So bear that in mind. And that leads us up to the Volca kick, which this is more like an instrument with, it features being able to play chromatically. It's basically got the one voice. It's got two fundamental parts, and the main part is the body of the kick drum. So with that, you're able to set pitches and do some FM type modulation as well. And then there's the click part. And so this two-layer thing is a big part of the Volca drum, which basically lets you, instead of limiting you to like a click for one and then the main drum sound for the other, they're identical. And so you can do two of the same things, maybe pitch shift them slightly. You can do two radically different things. It's a very open form of sound design, and I really like that about it. Now, where does the two-layer thing come from? Just sort of to make that a little bit more obvious, for this Tibetan bowl, if I put my thumb on it, you'll hear the impact of that mallet. Take it off, you'll hear the whole thing. But if you try hard, hopefully it'll come through the lav mic. If you try hard, you can hear both layers there, the hit and the ring. And so that's sort of the basis for this two-layer paradigm that the kick really and the Volca drum are going with. So what is the Volca drum really like? Okay, a lot of this stuff is different, but what is it really like? Well, while you won't see the term FM synthesis in the Volca drum manual, they talk about pitch modulation instead. That's basically what this is. It's a FM synthesis with essentially you have a source that you can choose a bunch of different types of sound sources. We'll get into designing a few different percussion sounds in just a few minutes, but kind of just want to go over a little bit of it just to, again, fit the context of it, that you've got various sources that you can control, like whether it's a sine wave, a saw wave, or noise of 3 different types. And then you've got a modulation that you can do to that, a pitch modulation, and it'll be sort of a one-shot thing, which kind of is similar to the kick, or it can be a sine modulation, so then really starts to sound more FM-y, then a noise modulation as well. And then you've got an envelope that you can control. So that's kind of an overview of the synthesis engine. But what is it like? You know, there are physical modeling things on a Microfreak that it kind of reminds me of. Some of the sounds that you're hearing right now in the background, they remind me a lot of the Soft Pop, which is a, I think, all analog device from Bassel Instruments and Casper Electronics. I like that the Volca drum can kind of go in that direction. You'll also hear some Castle type sounds. So this is a digital based FM synthesizer, and especially when you start to combine in some of the higher tempos and slicing, you can really get some sounds that sound a lot like the Castle. But for my mind, the thing that it's the most like is possibly the PO32. Now, I'm not just talking about the PO32 on its own. I'm talking about in combination with the Microtonic software, which you basically have a lot of sound design possibilities on that, and you can import that onto the Pocket Operator. But with the Volca drum, it's all in one, a lot of sound design capabilities, and a lot of power to the sequencer. So you've got 6 parts that form a kit, which is nice. And the kits and the programs, those are the terminologies, they are saved separately. So you've got 16 kits on the device, and you've got 16 programs. And it can take a little bit of getting used to if you're a Volca user, because when you save a program, we're kind of used to thinking of that saving whatever other settings you change to, possibly. And in some cases, not at all. But in this case, though, you can save the program that you've worked on in one slot, and then you can save the kit to another slot. You may want to keep them lined up. That's one way to do it, but you don't have to by a long shot. So before we dive in and start making some sounds on this, I want to just say some of the very best things that I've found about the Volca Drum. Not just things that I like, but things that I think are amazing. So one thing is, and it seems pretty like you ought to have it, well, it has to do with quantization of the pitch. If you've got a Volca Drum and haven't updated it, then you will, like, as shipped, it doesn't have pitch quantization. But once you do the update, then you can dial in things that are precisely pitched. So I think that's very powerful. And then another thing that I do not see anywhere in the manual, so I'm not quite sure if it has to do with the update or not, is that if you have motion sequencing on and you're in step edit mode, you can actually hold down a step and change a parameter to a fixed value. And that just strikes me as a whole lot like parameter locking on the model samples or Digitact, or something that you would do on a pocket operator as well. So I really love those features. I really like the separation of kits and programs. I think that that's a really good storage scheme. And then this concept of slice editing, which is basically retriggers where that you can take a step and then have it fire off multiple times within that step by using slices. That is incredible. For one thing, you can take it up to 16, which that's per trig. And the fact that you can bring the tempo up to 600, you are able to turn the step sequencer basically into a audio frequency LFO by approaching it that way. And it gives some crazy sounds from my own experimentation along those lines. We will get to that in some later videos. And then one thing that I really can't stress enough is that being able to do probabilities on individual trigs, individual steps, and that's per part. So to be able to determine whether a drum hits with a certain probability, that is an amazing aspect of this device. And it's something that you don't have in the kick or in the Volca Beats, and brings a lot of life to the sequences that you can make on this. And I should also say that there's sequence chaining as well. And then the last thing, which I find really intriguing, is that the Volca Drum has per step active step settings. This gives you the ability to make not just random, but sort of gear-like meshing patterns at a level that has not been possible on a Volca before. So I did a little math out, and on the lowest tempo, it's something along the lines of being able to make a sequence run that doesn't repeat for 12 days. And so that's pretty incredible. And if you do that, make sure to use the power supply. But I think, you know, it doesn't have to be that extreme. It just is saying that things like polyrhythms and tonal polyrhythms, they're within the capacity of the Volca Drum. So let's get started on some sound design. Okay, so in this video I'm mainly going to be focused on sound design and save a lot of the details of sequencing to the next video, but I really need to introduce some things about the sequencer to make the sound design more efficient. You'll see that. And then it's nice to have the sequencer at the end to kind of listen to what we've created. So let's turn it on. It boots up nice and quickly. And one thing to see is that if you do load program, it starts in program 1. And since I haven't changed anything from the factory settings down in this area, if I do load kit, you'll see that it's in kit 1. And just to reiterate, you can have any program associated with any kit. And we're going to come back to how that you need to make sure that that doesn't become a problem. It's very flexible, very powerful, but The downside is that it can get a little bit, dare I say, confusing. So onward. So if I want to hear that kit, I can just start tapping down here. So these 6 keys are how we listen to the parts if you want to play them directly. And it's also a way to know what part you're working on. So right now I'm highlighted with part number 1, part number 2, etc. Now, if I hit play, we got a nice beat going there. That's just the default. I think I may have changed it, but what I want to show right at this point is that the load program feature for this Volca is quite nice, because if I go into that, I can just start selecting patterns and it will immediately switch to that program. And I'm going to use the words pattern and program probably interchangeably in this case, but it doesn't close the load program interface. And so this is a great thing for performance. And it all just stays right at the same point, same step in your sequence. So it's quite nice. Okay, so I think it's worth a quick overview before we even really get started on designing a sound. How do you just even go about it? The display up here is really where you get a lot of your feedback about what's going on. And one of the most important buttons is right here. Each part, so we're in part 1, has a layer setting that you control with this button right here. So if I push this, it'll say layer 1, push it again, layer 2, and push it again, layer 1 and 2, and then the button stays lit in that case. Now, my experience has been that if you do settings while layer 1, 2 is lit like that, that you will basically gang the parameters together. And that's something that could be useful where that you want to make a drum sound that has, say, the same envelope shape, but then you just go back and tweak a little bit of difference on the layers. But the one thing that I've seen that's different is pitch, and we'll see this, which is that if you have one layer set at one pitch and the other layer set at a different pitch, then when you're in layer 1, 2, it will try to keep that interval. And that, I think, is a very wise design choice on this. So let's go to just as if we were editing a single layer. And so this is layer 1. The main thing is all contained in this one select knob here, and that is your synthesis mode. So right now the source, and I'm not sure how easy this is going to be to see unless I zoom or something like that, but I'll just call it out that right now the source is a sine wave. The modulation scheme is I think I'll call that just a transient, and then the envelope is linear. Okay, and so we can basically just by spinning this dial march through the bottom first, and so it's like counting not in binary but in trinary sort of. I'll explain that in a second. And so I'm just marching through the different settings, and it seems weird at first, but it's actually a pretty efficient way to do your selecting. Now, you'd think this might mean 27 different synthesis configurations. Turns out it's actually 45, that the noise for the source, so if I'm on sine, now I'm on sawtooth for the source, and then I come up here. This is a high-pass filtered noise, and it's really tiny, but there's a little filter shape in the box here. So it's high-pass, and you can choose different mods and envelopes for that. Then it goes to a low-pass noise and a band-pass noise. So there are actually 45 different synthesis methods, and when you get to the top one, which is bandpass, source, noise modulation, and a two-peaked envelope, which is sort of like the two-peak envelope, I think gives a little bit of almost like a initial transient, like a click, and then a main transient. Then when you go, it wraps around and comes all the way back to the original one. And then other features are pretty straightforward. The modulation that is chosen in this second row here, there's an amount for that and a rate for that. We'll explore that in a little bit. And then the envelope, which is set there, regardless of what type it is, you still can set an attack and a release for it. So those are sort of the sound choices, but then there's also pitch, which can be done either unquantized or quantized. And then there is a send that comes over to the waveguide. The waveguide is, as I talked about a little bit in the intro, think of it as just sort of an additional effect on the sound that is based on physical modeling. You're kind of sending the signal that you've created over here through a resonant structure that's maybe a tube, maybe a string, that's set down here on the keys. But you're able to choose a decay for how long it goes and sort of the timbre of what it sounds like, and also the overall tonal character of it. And that can become a delay even. We will get to that. Now, it can be kind of a lot to keep track of, but these are settings for the layer, and these are settings for the entire kit. Okay, and then in between that, there are even settings which you can access by hitting Edit that are for the part. So that is going to be the bit reduction, the folding, the drive, the pan, the gain, that's like a premix gain, and then this quantization, whether you have it on or off. So to clarify, some things are per layer, some things are per part, and some things are per kit, particularly over here. So as we're doing this, I'll try to be clear about the scope of influence of the parameters that we're changing. Okay, so to get moving here, I did my own prep of a simple kit, and that's going to be kit number 11. And if we listen to that, it's just 3 very neutral sounds. And then I've got the levels on the other parts just zeroed out, so we can't hear them. Okay, so this seems a little bit random, but I want to show you something about the choke groups, because it's very important to understand this from the very beginning of your work on the Volca drum. And just to bear with me for a second, I'm going to hit Edit Step, and so for part 1 you'll see that there are some steps in there. I'm even going to add in some slices. So that's the slice data. I'm going to add in, it's already got some accents, so I'll put some more. So this sequence is sort of all lit up, has all the characteristics, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do clear all. Alright, so if I do clear all, and I'm going to do clear all on the motion sequencing, and I'm going to do off for the motion sequencing. And so now, just to, let's go back and see whether what we did worked. I'm going to hit Edit Step. There's not any steps, no slices, no accents. So that part is good. But you've done everything that you could think to do to clear. I mean, you literally did clear all and clear all motion sequencing. And so the problem would be going on to work on what you're doing, and yet if you look at the chokes, they're still there. So I don't really know any way around this other than to turn them off. All right. What that would do later is it would make your sequence start to just sort of sparse out in a way that didn't really make much sense unless you understood what was going on with the chokes. And it can lead to some really unexpected results. So we've got that cleared out. We've got everything else cleared out. Now, the last little bit of bookkeeping here. Let's say that I want to put what we've done, the kit that I pre-made and the sequence that we just cleared out. Say we want to have that as kit 16 and program 16. It seems like we could just save the program as program 16 and then save the kit as kit 16 and everything would be fine. But that is not the case, because if we save the program first as program 16, then it will still have kit 11 as the associated kit, which is where our 3-part kit currently resides. So what we actually want to do is save the kit first. All right. So instead of being kit 11, we're going to save this to kit 16, and then we save the program to program 16. So if you want to do this type of thing where you have things paired together, 16 and 16, you need to do it in that way. And so that's save the kit first to the slot, then save the program to that slot. So I'm going to turn it off. We'll turn it back on. And this is just going to be to confirm what we're working with. So we'll do a load, program 16, and if we check to see what the kit is, we'll see that it's 16. If we play the sequence, it's empty. If we play the parts, it's what we expect. And if we inspect the chokes, they're gone. So we're all set to delve into the sound design. Okay, so for the first part, I want to keep it kind of simple. What I want to do is make something that's sort of like a Volca kick type sound. So to do that, I'm going to stick with the source as a sine wave, the transient modulation, and I'm going to just change over, instead of a linear envelope, I'm going to go with an exponential envelope, and I'll make it a little more plucky. And so if we hear that, not much difference, but what I'm going to do is start to introduce some modulation. And modulation can go negative or positive. One will make the sound go deeper. Let me turn the rate down so it's a little bit more obvious. Might need headphones to hear that, but I'm going to send it a little bit positive. All right. Then I'm going to bring the pitch down. And right now I'm working on both layers. Let me make it a little bit less modulation and bring it down even. So that's got a nice sort of resonant sound. For these videos, the headphones I use are not the best, so I'm sort of having to guess, but I think it'll be fine. Okay, and I'm going to make sure there's no wave kind of going on. Okay, so let's use that as a starting point, but then what I want to do is go to a specific layer, layer 2, and change the pitch somewhat. So we'll just listen to this as we go. And hopefully you can hear that there's sort of a chord-like sound to it now. Then if I go back to layer 1, layer 2, and change the pitch, that chord is maintained. I like that. Now we can certainly change the attack and release here. You know, attack starts to give it sort of a reversal type sound. So I'm going to just stick with a fairly sharp attack. I like to not quite have it on 0 just in case there's a click associated with it. I don't think there is on the Volca drum, but just to be on the safe side. Then the release, I think it's probably about right. Now, this is a good time to talk about how the Volca drum deals with preset parameter values. Now, every synth has to deal with this, where's the knob versus where the preset value for the knob is. And the way the drum does it is it immediately lets the knob take over. So then if you want to get back to where you were as part of the preset, you have to kind of fish around and look. There's a little, if I can't find it easily, I'm not going to struggle too hard, but there's a little dash that appears beside the number where the preset value was. So anyway, let's just do this by hand here. All right, I like that. So that's given us the chord because one layer has a different pitch, but everything else for it is exactly the same. Now, these are not all the parameters that we have to work with. For the next set of parameters, which are buried down in the editing features, we're going to need to set up a sequence, because if we didn't, like right now, this is set for bit reduction, and if I want to change the bit reduction, I can, but if I want to listen to it, that's putting on a step. It's turning a step on and off. So we're not actually able to do it that way. We would have to come out of it and hit it. Okay, it's not very efficient. So what we're going to do is put in some steps and hit play. And now that's going to enable us to edit this on the fly. So that was bit reduction. Starts to really sizzle that high end. I'll leave a tiny bit of that in there, and then next thing is folding. So this is a wave folding scheme that sort of roughens up the sound. I'm just going to turn that off, and there's that little dash. It was set at 0. I sort of cleaned out these things and neutralized them, so everything's going to be set at 0, but you can see the dash, which indicates where things were set. Now, next is the drive. Let's give it some drive. You can start to hear that a little bit on the high end. And then the next parameter is the pan. Let's leave number 1 in, so part 1 in the middle. We'll try and pan the others a little bit left and right. And then the gain, not going to mess with, and the pitch quantization I have on. And I like having that on, but there are certainly reasons that for certain parts you would want to have it off. So that's a per part thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. So we just do save kit and 16, and so we've got that for our first sound. Alright, now moving on to sound 2, I sort of wanted to do a low, medium, and high sort of thing with the 3 sounds. So let's go here, and what I want to do is pay a little more attention to the individual layers with this one. So let's go to layer 1, 2, and a method that I've found that works is to just turn the level down on layer 2. Okay, so now we're going to go back, cycle back to layer 1. So right now we're only hearing layer 1. And what I want to do is change the synthesis mode to a sawtooth wave, so you kind of scroll, and so now right there, that is a sawtooth. And then I want to have the modulation be a sine wave, so it's going to be a different scheme. And let's stick with a linear envelope, and not quite sure what this will sound like as set, but let's hear it. That's cool. It's pretty string-like. So let me check the mod amount. Yeah, okay, that's a little more what I was expecting. Turn the rate up a little. That's kind of cool. Then maybe I'll give it a little bit more of an attack and then down on the release. So that's kind of a nice synthetic sound. Now I'm going to turn the level down on that. I won't be able to hear anything. Then go to layer 2, turn that up. I think it was at 200-ish. Yeah, look, there's the dash helping me out. That's, I hit the wrong part accidentally. Let's see, back to there. Okay, so that's the correct level. Now for this one, I want something a little bit sharper, and let's go to a noise also. Let's go to a high pass filter noise, and then just plain transients, and hear what that sounds like. All right, and then we'll sharpen it up. Okay, maybe that's good enough, and then let's go back to layer 1 and turn the volume up, the level up. Thereabouts, yeah. 201 was the default for this little kit that I made. So now if we hear that all combined, I'm going to make sure to go to layer 1, 2. So we don't do anything to the individual layers anymore. And now you can see it does this sort of, I don't know, I guess it makes sense. This dynamic thing showing what the two layers are using for synthesis modes. So we'll play that. You can hear the both parts pretty clearly. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to mute part 1 so we don't hear that in the background. And I'm going to go ahead and put some parts on for some steps on for part 2. Hit play, and let's see if we can't change this up a little bit. I'm going to go back to the bit reduction. Let's hit it with a fair amount of that, and then let's pan it a little to the left. Okay, so minus 75. Let's remember that. Alright, let's just call that done. I want to take these steps off as well. Alright, we want to make sure to save that to the kit. And so 16 again. That's good. Now I'm going to go back to the mutes and turn number 2 off so we don't have any confusion. And then let's start working on sound number 3. So for this one, let's go to just pure noise. So to do that, I think let's try the bandpass noise. So that's, maybe it's easiest to roll backwards on it. We use bandpass noise with a transient modulation, and then the, well, we'll do the 2 peak because we haven't done it. I don't know that that's really going to be, if we do something short, you probably can't even tell, but we'll just do it for the sake of completeness. Now, I did that on layer 1, 2. I think that's fine. Let's just make a really high-pitched, noisy thing, and so we'll start and just listen. Let's turn up the modulation a little bit, and the rate, so it's sort of a chirp. All right. I like that kind of chirpiness to it. Okay, and then we can go into layer 1, and let's just change the timing on the rate a little bit, slow it down. So they will, and then I'll also change the release a little bit for that. So they're going to have slightly, the two layers will sort of like have a little bit of a different character to them. Listen to that. That's good. And then let's do the same thing where we put in some steps, hit play, listen to it, and this seems like yeah, bit reduction gives it some nice sizzle. Let's turn that off though and hear what the folding does in the noise case. I also don't know. I don't hear much. That kind of makes sense because the noise is already sort of as folded as it can get. Drive should be good. Yeah, that does make it brighter. I feel like you lose a little bit of the clarity there, so I'm going to go back to the bit reduction there and see if just a touch of that is good. I like that. It kind of influences the high end. Okay, so let's get out of that editing, and then I think maybe just tighten that envelope up a little bit. So we need to be careful. Let's see, was it layer 1, I think? Okay, let's go with that. So we're gonna stop this and save the kit here, and then let's unmute and listen to them. Okay, I forgot to pan that one, number 3. So let's go back and do that. We hit edit, we select pan, and we're going to put it at plus 75. Alright, so then we'll come back out. I want to take those trigs off too. Good. So, alright, save that kit so that last little bit gets stored. Okay, now we're in the home stretch. We've got 3 sounds. Time to do the sequence. I said no frills, but we'll put in just a few frills to make it more interesting. If we go here to part number 1, and we'll go to edit step, let's just put down on 4s, and then you can, without having to hear the hit, you can switch parts by going function and hit the and in this case, since you're in edit mode, it's really the only way to do it. You can do function and then hit the part number, and that'll switch us. I'm gonna just start to put some things down, and a little bit of logic to it. I'm gonna leave the end here kind of empty for a reason I'll tell you in a second, and then for the third part, let's really spice that up. Okay, so let's give it a listen. Okay, so now let's turn off edit step and go to part 2 and then go to active step. So what I want to do is just sort of mess with things a little bit by turning off, that was just as clumsy as possible, 11 steps, and what that'll do is really have it phase sort of a polyrhythm with the main structure. And now I don't really like sort of the monotony of the 4 on the floor bass drum, so what we're going to do is do another little frill, which is probability. Let's go to part 1, hit edit step, and I'm going to add some hits that are kind of off, and then what I want to do is basically back some of these down, the ones on the beat, to like 75%. So we'll keep sort of the same rhythmic structure, but then go to some of these off ones and make them more like 25. And when you combine this probability stuff with the polyrhythmic phasing, it leaves you with a lot of choices for trying to make a well-varied rhythm. I'm even going to bring some of these up a little bit. So let's go to edit step, and I'll make them more like 50. So that's a little bit dense on the low end. And one way to sort of have an impact on that density that can be interesting is, since we've got active step sort of phasing part 2, let's put a choke group together of part 2 and part 1, so 2 takes priority and we'll mute 1. Okay, so that's pretty open, and one thing to think about with the Volca drum is using the wave guide that really helps kind of fill things in. I am going to go to part 1 and going to turn the send up for that. So we'll leave it at about 180 for part 1. I'm going to skip part 2, leave that as is, and then do the also send, max out the send for part 3. Then we can kind of play with the decay a little bit. So the tune is sort of like a delay time. The decay is sort of how much repeating you get, and then the timbre is coming from the body. Back off on the decay a little bit. Get a little bit of emptiness in there. Okay, I feel like we have gotten something pretty nice. Alright, well, I kind of delayed putting this video out because honestly it took a while to wrap my head around the different layer, part, kit, parameters, and how they all interact. And I never know how a segment like the one we just did is going to turn out, but I think it turned out pretty nice. So this has been sort of an overview and an intro. Next video I'm going to do is going to be a delta waves ambient piece. I don't have anything worked out for that yet, but then I'm going to be coming back to the Volca drum. I want to do 4 videos in all. So the second one will be on the sequencer, adding in things like motion sequencing, parameter locking, and the slicing. And we'll get more examples of the sound design as we sort of go through that. And then in the third video, I want to just do some demos of how the Volca drum goes with other Volcas, other gear in general, like maybe the BeatStep Pro as a controller for it, and also using the DAW to control it, which there are a ton of settings for CC control in the MIDI implementation chart. So I think that DAW control of this will be super powerful. And then in the fourth video, I want to just go sort of back to this on its own, maybe some post-processing effects, but how you can use the Volca drum to do soundscapes and get some really different types of sounds by playing with the tempo, the waveguide effect, and the slicing as well. So that's a little bit more like what I did at the very beginning of the video. I think that'll be a good way to close this series out. So that's a lot to look forward to on the Volca drum. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next one.